Mark chapter 1, beginning at verse 40. A man with leprosy came to Jesus and begged him on his knees, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus was indignant. He reached out his hand and touched the man. "I'm willing," he said. "Be clean." Immediately the leprosy left him and he was cleansed. Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. "See that you don't tell this to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them." Instead, he went out and began to talk freely, spreading the news. As a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places. Yet the people still came to him from everywhere. As Jesus was making his way through Galilee, he was doing so almost as if it was the crowded waiting emergency room of a hospital. Everywhere he goes, Jesus proclaims the good news and heals the sick. And here, in this case, when a leper came to him begging, kneeling, the leper said to him, "If you choose, make me clean." Moved with compassion, Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him. And he said to him, "I do choose, be made clean." And immediately the leprosy was gone, and he was made clean. Jesus told him not to tell anyone what had happened. Well, you can't blame the guy, really. He went out and immediately told everyone. He knew exactly what happened. And the word began to spread, so much so that Jesus could no longer go into a town openly. He had to stay out on the outskirts of town and let the crowds come out to him. If you study Mark's gospel or read the commentaries, you'll come across what biblical scholars call the messianic secret. What this refers to is Jesus' insistence that those who witness his miracles keep it confidential, keep it a secret. As in our text this morning, he heals the man and then says to him, "Don't tell anyone, keep it a secret." Jesus doesn't seek the limelight. He doesn't want publicity as a miracle worker. Miracles tend to make an audience of thrill seekers. Jesus wants people to come to faith, understanding who he is and what he is about for the right reasons. He is not seeking to be a celebrity, famous for magically taking away all of people's problems. But even so, the man is not able to keep it to himself. That's okay. We won't be too hard on the guy. Jesus heals this man with leprosy. Leprosy was a common affliction in Jesus' time. It is much less common in our own time. Still, there are cases of leprosy, particularly in poor countries where there is not adequate medical care. From what I understand, leprosy destroys nerve cells, the primary function of which is to alert us to pain. This is part of the problem with leprosy. The patient might touch a hot stove or hot water and damage their bodies. They might walk all day on a sharp metal nail, unconscious to the damage that it might cause. All kinds of things. This can lead to a loss of limb, but at no point is the leprosy patient actually hurt by these things. Even though they might not hurt, leprosy patients must surely suffer. And almost all of the pain that they feel is a pain that they feel from the outside. The pain of being unwanted, the pain of being rejected, imposed upon them by their surrounding community. Dr. Paul Brand, who was well known for his care of leprosy patients, told of one bright young man whom he was treating in India. And in the course of the examination, Dr. Brand laid his hand on the patient's shoulder and told him about the course of treatment that he was going to have. To his surprise, the young man began to shake and weep. Dr. Brand asked the translator, "Have I done something wrong?" And she quizzed the patient in her language, and she reported, "No, doctor, he says he is crying because you put your hand on his shoulder, and until he came here, no one had touched him in years." Mother Teresa of Calcutta once said, "We have drugs for people with diseases like leprosy, but these drugs do not treat the main problem, the dis-ease of being unwanted." Jesus knew all about the social stigma that went along with a disease like leprosy. In his day, a person with leprosy was considered ritually unclean. They weren't permitted in places of worship. They were cut off from all family and friends. Levitical laws decreed that a person with leprosy lived outside of town. They would have to maintain a 6-foot distance between that person and everyone else. They would wear clothes of a mourner going to a burial service. They were socially ostracized, separated from friends and neighbors, separated from all public life. The leper was a corpse haunting the outskirts of a community where he was no longer welcome. We can imagine the righteous indignation rippling through the crowd when one of these individuals walked through them and threw himself at the feet of Jesus. "Lord, if you want to, you can make me clean," he says. And Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. He didn't have to touch him, of course. Jesus had done long-distance healings before. Remember the centurion's servant that he healed from far away. He simply told the man that when he got home, his servant would be well again. He didn't have to touch him. Jesus didn't have to reach out in front of all of those people and put his hand on the man's shoulder, but he did. And it tells me that this is an important part of understanding Jesus' ministry for all of us who seek to follow after him. Jesus did not minister long distance, safe from all of the things that plagued the lives of those he wanted to help. As one commentator put it, his work of forgiving brought him in contact with sinners. His work of lifting placed him down among the fallen. His words of encouragement were given among the hopeless. His healing put him with the diseased. His giving new life brought him to the tomb. Jesus healing this man was more than just a change in the man's physical condition. This healing had domestic and social and religious effects. This healing is more than just curing the disease of leprosy. This is a complete restoration of this man's life. Jesus has mended the torn fabric of relationship here. The man is healed, but even more significantly, the man is restored into right relationship, restored to being a part of a community again, restored to full humanity again. And that is what Jesus came to do, to restore, to make us whole again, to break down those things that keep us estranged from one another, and to bring peace, shalom, healing, restoration. I'm going to tell you a story about a woman named Margaret. And to protect the innocent, let's say that this picture is a picture of Margaret. Margaret attended St. Andrew's in Hespeler, where I was an associate minister for 2 years. And Margaret seemed to us to be dissatisfied, unhappy with the congregation in general, and unhappy with the ministers in particular. In Margaret's eyes, Jeff, the senior minister, and I could do nothing right. We were a pair of nincompoops as far as Margaret was concerned. And it was not uncommon to see Margaret walking in from the parking lot at the beginning of the week to find one of us to hear her complaints about something that was said in a sermon, or a poorly chosen hymn, or there was something we could do or be doing better. Sometimes our secretary would see Margaret coming and try to intercept us or warn us to look busy because Margaret is coming. Margaret wore her unhappiness on her face, a kind of school teacher scowl that said, "Look out." And there was nothing, seemingly, that Jeff or I could do to help her. And God knows, we tried. And then one day I was in the office with my daughter Abigail. Abby, as you know, has Rett syndrome and cannot speak, although at one point she had a vocabulary of 100 words or so. But this, of course, does not mean that Abby does not communicate, which she does with considerable charm, with her bright eyes, her smile, and she sometimes uses her hands. On this particular day, when Margaret came into the office, Abby went up to her. She doesn't respect personal space. And she stood in Margaret's way as if to intercept her, with her face about 6 inches from her, nose to nose. I wondered what would happen next, and then Abby's face lit up with her trademark smile. And joy, I have always thought, is a kind of contagion, and it is almost impossible to be unhappy in the presence of Abby's smile 6 inches from your face. And a small miracle happened just then. Something melted in Margaret, and Margaret began to smile as well. We had never seen Margaret smile before. "Oh," she said, "this must be Abigail." I had to take a phone call just then, and Margaret said she would watch Abby while I was on the phone. And when I came out of the office a few minutes later, I found Margaret and Abby walking hand in hand in the sanctuary, both of them happy as proverbial clams. It was the beginning of a special relationship between the two. Now, I'd like to say that Margaret never complained again, but that would only happen in fairy tales, and this was real life. But the miracle was that Abby accomplished without words, with her smile and vulnerability, with her touch, what Jeff and I could never accomplish. Abby is a charmer, and as I have watched her closely over the years, she has helped a lot of people, even me, maybe especially me, to let down our guard and to poke some holes in those walls of self-protection and isolation, and the fear we have of, God forbid, being different, or even being with someone who's different. She has helped a lot of people to touch and be touched. And I think today of all the barriers that separate us as human beings, fear and mistrust, anger and loneliness, the inability to communicate with even those we love the most. In many ways, we move through our lives like lepers, keeping our distance, giving each other a wide berth, afraid to touch each other's lives, and afraid to allow our lives to be touched by other people. But here and there pop up people and stories that remind us that it really is true that the kingdom of God is as Jesus said among us. And often it shows up in the capacity to touch, to love, to forgive, the capacity to allow oneself to be touched, to be loved, to be forgiven, to be healed, to be made whole, to be restored to full humanity. The capacity to break down the distance between us. This is the work of Christ. A rather young, innocent woman from a small town went to look for a job in the big city, and she was given one of those job application forms to fill out: name, address, work history, etc. And then she came to the question, "In case of emergency, call." And she was puzzled by the question and called the personnel manager over and said, I don't understand this question." And the manager said, "Well, you know, if you had an accident on the job, who we would call?" And she looked at him and she said, "Why, the nearest human being, of course." The nearest human being. How cute. How naive. The healing that Jesus gives is the miracle of restoration to a new community and a new way of being, where we actually see ourselves and those around us as the nearest human being. The healing that Jesus gives is being restored to part of the community again. And it is a miracle whenever that happens.